Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. And in this bonus episode, we'll be reflecting on a recent interview with the Chief Executive of the Royal National Institute of Blind People, or RNIB. Matt Stringer has been in the role for almost 7 years and he's stepping down this month. Emily, you went to meet him recently. There's already a full write-up of your discussion on the Third Sector website. What sort of context did he arrive into when he took up the role back in 2019?
Yes, so when Stringer joined, the charity was subject to a Charity Commission inquiry over safeguarding concerns at one of its homes. The inquiry, which opened in 2018, investigated RNIB and its subsidiary, the RNIB charity, over concerns about the oversight and management of the RNIB Pears Centre for Specialist Learning in Coventry. Matt told me that the inquiry exposed a number of other challenges in the organisation as well, around governance, financial controls and safeguarding. But because he was new to the charity coming into it, he was able to be really objective and properly overhaul those deep-rooted challenges.
So actually quite a positive that he was brand new to the organisation and could come in and lead the way in dealing with it, rather than perhaps being a baptism of fire for him. But this was his first ever charity job, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So before joining the RNIB, Matt actually spent about 30 years working in corporate retail and retail consulting. So I asked him about how this transition was, moving from the world of corporate retail to the charity sector, and this is what he had to say.
I think there are many similarities, actually. I mean, I think, retail is very focused on customer. At the end of the day, you live or die by how well you attract and retain customers. And I think, similar for us in terms of beneficiaries, how we support and retain the loyalty and the participation of our beneficiaries, whether that's people that rely on our services or volunteers or people who want to engage with our purpose. And there's lots of similarities there, actually, in terms of how you engage people and manage a very positive relationship for them with the organisation, the way that a retailer would manage its customers. There's a sort of profit motive in retail at the end of the day to satisfy shareholders, which is slightly different, in the charity sector. But I think increasingly, the charity sector has to be very financially astute in how it manages its money. Charity Commission guidance this year talks to more charities, spending more than they're bringing in, up from last year, and making the point about trustees having to be very strong on the financial management of charities. And I think that is straying more into sort of business territory where that financial sort of acumen is just second nature. So I think things are converging a little bit more than diverging.
So I thought his observation there about learning from the corporate world's financial strengths was really interesting. Should charities be more like big business is a question that I think a lot of people might turn their nose up at. A lot of people who are working in the sector, but actually in the current economic climate, I can see the merit in that argument. Those cross-sector learnings are becoming increasingly more important. And while I might not go as far as to say that charity needs to emulate big business, which also is not what Matt was saying either, perhaps taking a page out of their books could provide some useful insight and hopefully more funds.
Yeah. You went to meet Matt at the RNIB offices, and I understand that they are award-winning offices.
Yes, so it was really interesting actually. While I was waiting on getting into the room with Matt, there was lots going on. RNIB's London office is also home to a low vision clinic, and that meant that there were plenty of people coming in and out, including service users, guide dogs as well. And while I was waiting in reception, there was actually a group of people getting a tour of the building.
Oh.
So I later found out that the building has won awards for its accessibility. I overheard little snippets of the tour. There was things like they've used textures in the office to make sure that people with sight loss can navigate through the office really easily. They decided to go the tactile route rather than going for bright colours, which is typically seen as being quite inclusive for people with low vision, but actually can be a barrier for people with neurodivergence. So I thought that was really interesting. Because I'd had this sort of introduction to the office while I was just sitting in the lobby, I then asked Matt how he, as a leader, makes sure that accessibility isn't just there for their beneficiaries and their service users, but is also there for staff as well.
We try and be ever vigilant. I have to be honest, we probably don't always get it right internally. But look, I mean, here we are sitting in our London office, which has won awards for accessibility, where we've perfected a lot of things around lighting, contrast paint treatments, tactile surfaces, sort of safety features on things like kitchens and navigation aids, use of technology. So, we're trying to genuinely sort of walk the walk and talk the talk, and we've done this in all our buildings. I think in terms of our routine operations, clearly we have sort of protocols for document production and meeting protocols using Teams and other media to meet, to make sure that visually impaired people have a completely level playing field with our sighted staff. So, for example, one example would be, visually impaired people, it can be challenging to use chat on Teams because you can't see it. So, having protocols around things like that are important. All our sort of documents we make sure go through an accessibility process so they are fully accessible for people that use things like screen reading technology. So we're very good and active in it, and it's something that we advise and consult other organisations on because we are deemed to have a lot of expertise. I would also say, we need to be constantly checking ourselves to make sure we are as good as we need to be, and that we're keeping abreast of sort of technological developments and sort of meeting protocols, and making sure our internal staff sort of networks, are feeding back their experiences and helping shape, how we evolve.
It's great to hear that RNIB is leading the way in this accessibility drive, and also being able to advise other organisations based on their experience and expertise. But it hasn't all been plain sailing for Matt since he came in. As you alluded to earlier, they were in the throes of a statutory inquiry, and the RNIB has also not been immune to the need for cuts as a result of the economic challenges facing the sector, right?
Last summer, the RNIB embarked on an organisation-wide restructure, which we know many charities have had to do because of the current economic climate. This restructure resulted in nearly 200 jobs out of around 1,250 being cut from the organisation. The charity started its restructure after it had published its new strategy, and the restructure aimed to put in place those changes that were included in the strategy and to get the organisation on a financially sustainable footing. Here's what Matt had to say about the restructure.
A lot of charities, having to face into the sort of challenges economically, politically at the moment. We're not immune from that. We did it from a position of reasonable strength because we recovered the organisation's finances coming out of the statutory inquiry, largely because we disposed of a lot of our regulated services property, and we moved our London office, so we were in good shape financially. But I think it was partly to sort of try and right size the organisation going forward, and also in reflection of our strategy, trying to get the right organisational setup to be better able to deliver those things I mentioned, and face into challenges where we might have a bit of duplication or a bit of over-indexing in certain places and we're under-indexing in others. So we went through that transformation programme from the summer of 2024. We finished it sort of March, April this year. We're already thinking again now about what the future holds for the RNIB. It can't be that we've just done a change programme and then everything just stays the same for 5 years. There's a lot happening and you've got to take account of it. So I think all organisations need to be vigilant about constantly horizon scanning and looking for how they set themselves up for the future.
I thought something that he said at the beginning of that clip was really interesting around the fact that they had to really take measures to ensure that the organisation remained financially viable coming out of its statutory inquiry. This is something that we've heard with other organisations as well. I'm thinking back to our interview with Lauren Stoner as part of our When Charity Goes Wrong documentary series that came out earlier this year, saying that she did not believe that mermaids would have survived the inquiry that they were under from a financial perspective if they hadn't had a very unusually high amount of financial reserves. I think that has a lot to say about how charities are regulated and just how significant the impact is of a statutory inquiry.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that Matt's coming at this from the perspective of having been in the corporate world, and he did speak a lot during our discussion about the importance for charities, particularly at this moment in time, to be a bit more financially conscious and make sure that their fundraising income is really being used and maximised to the best of its ability. But yes, going through a statutory inquiry, it can take a toll on an organisation financially, definitely. And we know that at the moment, so many charities are going through transformations, going through restructures, and needing to really look at where they're perhaps over-indexing, to use Matt's word. So I think there's questions there about how regulation can be improved to make sure that those financial challenges aren't amplified.
I also found it interesting that he by no means sees this restructure and the new strategy as a job done. As he said, the context is changing all the time. I know that later in the interview, he talked about digital changes, AI, obviously, and the impact that that is having on the sector. And he had quite a few other things to say about the lessons that he's learned from the restructure process. So let's have a listen to that now.
You've got to be open, whoever you're talking to. So we tried to do that. Look, if I'm honest, I think we did a good, thorough job. We had a monthly all-hands session where we absolutely faced into updates on what we were doing. We took open questions. There was no trying to limit people's ability to question. We were running daily FAQ processes to, as people thought about things and asked us questions. We had a process for cycling those back around through the organisation. We did local directorate sort of town hall sessions. So it was a very full comms agenda with a dedicated comms team on it. Having said that, I don't think we got it all right. For some people, announcing in July and then really implementing in spring of the following year, 6-7 months was a long time, too much. People wanted to know. They didn't want to hang around. And for some people, it was too soon. They wanted us to take longer. So whatever we did, I don't think we'd have been able to satisfy everybody. And maybe that's a lesson from it, is that you've got to pull a plan together and stick to it a bit, knowing that you're going to have some challenge internally, whatever you do, and externally. It's hard. Transformation's hard. No one enjoys it. People don't enjoy implementing it. People don't enjoy being on the receiving end of it. Hence the need to communicate effectively. I think once you've decided you need to do it, you're going to do it. Then my point would be stick to your guns. I mean, the danger is you end up sort of diluting it and going off at half cock, and then that doesn't suit anybody, frankly. I mean, I think you've got to have the courage of your convictions and see it through. You've got to be flexible, and you've got to take feedback, and of course you've got to mould. But there are certain things we did where we possibly took a slightly easier option because it was hard. And I think in retrospect, I probably wish we'd stuck to our guns on one or two things, because actually we'd have been better off now going forwards as an organisation.
It was interesting hearing him speak so frankly about the learnings from going through a transformation of that magnitude. And there's a lot in there for charity leaders or others who are experiencing stages of restructures at the moment, or restructure processes at the moment, to take from that discussion and really focus on having that clear communication. And it does sound like perhaps the process was quite lengthy. That period did strike me as quite a long period of time.
Yeah, about 9 months, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. Of course, some people are going to feel that that's too long, but then Matt also said that others felt that it wasn't quite long enough. So I guess there's no pleasing everyone, and you've just got to take whichever decisions are in the best interest of the charity at the end of the day.
And as he said, sticking to your guns.
Mm-hmm.
And very interesting to hear that he expressed some regret that they didn't do that in all cases, and he probably wished that they had done.
Yeah.
Now, no conversation with a charity leader this year would be complete without talking about the Civil Society Covenant. We now know that a council has been established and, hasn't quite been established, but has been announced and will be chaired by Kate Lee from NCVO, and will be looking for additional members in early January. What did Matt have to say about the Covenant?
So every single charity leader that I ask about the Covenant says it's early days, and I mentioned this to him and he proceeded to say it's early days. But he did have some really interesting things to say about how implementation is going. So let's take a listen.
Seeing the government really getting behind the sort of third sector, understanding the role it can play in helping tackle some of those bigger sort of challenges we've just been talking about, I think is the opportunity. We haven't quite seen the government's sort of grasped that yet beyond the initial pronouncements and the sort of launch events. It's tough being in government, and I think we just see that as we engage with different ministries and different ministers on different things. You can see how sometimes there seem to be opportunities and sometimes it's just more challenging. It's difficult to sort of get heard. So the Covenant, I think the aspiration is there, which is good. I think the reality is people campaign in poetry, govern in prose. I think it's difficult when you get into power to maybe do everything you want to do, and you've got other distractions, global events knock you off course, and it's difficult maybe to always follow through on what you intended to do. I think we need to keep going, but I think we need to bring solutions. This is the point, not just turn up and be a critic. I think we've had our best moments where we've engaged by offering solutions. So I think we've got to help ourselves as a sector to go with well-constructed solutions with good data, to make government sit up and take notice and see the positives of what we're bringing. What we shouldn't be is just a critic sitting on the tight sidelines sort of carping about things. I think we've got to realise some of the challenges in the national condition and bring solutions.
What we shouldn't be is just a critic. I think that's a very good point. I have heard the sector get feedback that sounds very similar to that. The sector is full of cynics, some might say, and while I don't necessarily agree with that, I do think that there is more scope for optimism and for solutions-based thinking moving forward. Now, Matt himself may not necessarily be part of that solution. He plans on staying in his non-executive role as a trustee of RNIB, but he is leaving the sector to semi-retire. I asked him about his reasons for his departure and why now was the right time to step away from RNIB.
I've done 7 years. It's quite a long time. As we've been touching on, we've got a challenging time at the RNIB, getting us out of a problem and then actually trying to shape the opportunity. Interested to see you covered Jane Ide yesterday talking about 10 years of CEOs and about how people need to realise that the tenure of a CEO is going to be shorter because the pressures have never been greater. And I have some sympathy with that. So I think 7 years is about a good time. I think I've sort of put a lot of energy into the RNIB. I think it's recognising the tanks starting to empty a bit and time to hand it over to weigh another. And look, we're in good shape. We've had 2 cycles of my time here, one coming out of a crisis and then one really trying to build something positive. And I think those 2 have sort of concluded really. So the second one is coming to the end now with the strategy we put out and the level we're at. And as I say, the organisation is going to have to think about its next cycle going forwards. And it seems a good time, to hand over the baton to someone else to come in. I've got a few other sort of irons in the fire from people. I'm just trying to keep it all a bit at arm's length because the danger is you end up accepting too much and suddenly finally fill the diary. I'm off to Australia to watch the Ashes for 2 days, although I think by the time I get there, the series will be long since lost, but never done Australia. So nice to have a break and then, come back at the end of January and take stock with a bit of headroom.
So it's nice to hear that he is taking a bit of a break, although, as Matt said, he does have some irons in the fire for the new year. So I'll be interested to see what he gets up to in his semi-retirement.
Yes, and hope he does have a proper break. It was interesting to hear the candour with which he expresses that, the tanks are running empty, echoing what Jane Ide said on this podcast just a couple of weeks ago about how hard it is for leaders at the moment. And if you'd initially envisaged that you were coming in for 10 years, then perhaps you need to be thinking more likely 7 or 8. Well, Emily, it was great to hear about your chat with Matt, and hopefully we will be meeting his successor, Simon Antrobus, before too long, who will be joining the RNIB in January from BBC Children in Need. And your feature is available on the Third Sector website under the Features tab if you would like to read more about the conversation. So that's it for this episode. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you for listening. Our producers are Jude Owen and Nav Pal.